Welcome to HVAC training. In this module we will be discussing flushing contaminated systems. If a system failure was the result of a component failure, the system must be properly flushed and purged. Old dryers, waterlogged refrigerant, and internally damaged compressors can lead to metal and corrosion particles being transported throughout the system, causing damage to other components within the system. By flushing the AC components, this removes this contamination. It's very important to flush the contamination out of a system because if you put a new compressor into a dirty system, that new compressor will pull those contamination particles in and cause failure of the new compressor quickly. Let's take a look at some of the different contamination that we see in failed compressors. In these photos you can see the metal contamination that was back in the system, which was pulled back into the new compressor after 2 days of service and destroyed that compressor. Or here on this failed receiver dryer, you can see the corrosion, the rust on the screen inside. That is caused by acidic refrigerant, acid, attacking the steel components within the dryer. Or here in this expansion valve, you can see the oversaturated desiccant that broke down in the dryer and escaped the dryer and then plugged up the expansion valve. So all of this contamination has to be flushed out of the system, along with all the old oil that's back throughout the system. It's always a good idea to take a look at the oil inside of the compressor to check the condition. Here's a few examples. The black oil is burned, overheated. You want to be careful of the silver gray looking oil. That is metal contamination. And also of the orange copper color. That's a moisture contamination issue. So all of this contamination and old oil must be flushed out of the system. You cannot flush the compressor, you cannot flush the receiver dryer or the accumulator, nor can you flush the expansion valve or the orifice tube. These parts you replace. So what's left that you can flush? The condenser, the evaporator, and all the hoses. That's what you have to concentrate on when flushing. So here is how you flush. If you're doing any AC work with real regularity, you need a flush gun in your toolbox. The flush gun removes contaminants from the evaporator, the condenser, and the hoses. It's very easy to use. You pour 1 to 2 pints of AC flush solvent in the top of the gun, screw on the lid, you pressurize the can with, preferably with dry nitrogen, and then you flush one component at a time. And you always want to flush in the opposite direction of normal refrigerant flow. Flush until the flow coming out of the component is clear. You'll want to use a good quality AC flush, something that is solvent based. You want a solvent based fluid because it will evaporate quickly. You don't want to leave any liquid flush back in the system because that will cause more problems once you put the system back together. You do not want to use brake cleaner, alcohol, or ether. And if you're working on sleeper cab trucks, don't forget that there's an evaporator, an expansion valve, and a lot of hose leading back to the rear. Those will trap a large amount of contaminants also, and those have to be flushed as well. A big problem with flushing in new vehicles is the condenser. Many new vehicles have multi-flow condensers, which are virtually impossible to flush effectively due to their construction. These types of condensers have very small passageways, very small tubes, and due to their construction, they are not one continuous tube through the condenser. There's simply no way to pressurize the entire tube to flush all contamination out. So on these types of condensers, these have become disposable. Basically, you replace them just like you would the dryer or the expansion valve. Thank you for viewing this training module.